fast forward 20 hours from the moment she tells me. We're in the delivery room, and I'm holding her hand, and she's afraid, and I'm afraid, and we don't know what's happening, but she's giving birth. Welcome to the first ever episode of Millennial Milestones, a podcast where we try to spotlight millennials or young people of today and the milestones they've achieved in their life and how that inspired them, inspired their friends, and inspired others to do something with their lives or to move forward towards difficulty. And before we start, I'd like to give a brief introduction on myself and why I'm the host of this podcast and what the theme of this podcast will sound like, with a quick little story of my own milestone. A milestone that happened about 2.5 years ago, and how it affected me today. Because today I finally have a quote-unquote adult schedule. I'm in a schedule in my life now where I can put the needs of my son before the desires of a 24-year-old. I can balance being a father with studies and work and a few other stuff. And that happened just within the last few months, that everything kind of blended together in my schedule. Now, ever since I was really young, I was always a night owl. I remember when I was 6 years old, my mother would sit me down at the lunch or the dining room table and keep me up way past my bedtime, because instead of doing the homework that I should have done, I was running around and avoiding my responsibilities, thinking that homework would go away if I just played hard enough, which of course wasn't correct. And fast forward to me at 22 and in college, I would still wait till the last possible moment to start any of my projects or papers or assignments, because nothing's changed since then, right? I'm still the same 6-year-old with adult responsibilities. And I'm sure a lot of you are in the same position, where you wait till the last possible moment to do what you have to do. I don't know, maybe we're running away from something. Maybe we think they'll just go away if we wait hard enough. And of course, we all know that doesn't work. Now, fast forward to 2 years ago in November, and I just started working on a project that should have taken weeks to complete. I'm full of self-loathing, and I'm just mad at myself for taking so long to start. But eventually I finish my work. And eventually I light up a cigarette, open up a beer to celebrate. And within 20, 30 minutes, my ex-girlfriend texts me and says, "We have to talk." A line that a lot of us know don't always end well, just from movies and TV shows. But this was my first breakup, and I had no idea anything was happening. We were still friendly, still communicating regularly. So I thought it was something that I forgot at her place or something relatively small. And I didn't think anything of it. So I head over to her place, and she's not there. It's just her friend with a slightly concerned look on his face. And we talk about something like the weather or football or something insignificant until she arrives. And when she does, she's clearly a little bit afraid to tell me what's going on, and I'm still in the dark and I have no idea what's happening. And we talk for about an hour and a half, and I still have no idea what's happening. And then she drops a surprising little detail that she's over 7 months pregnant, and very soon I'm going to be a father. Now, she tells me in a few weeks she's due to give birth, and so even if I'm shocked, I don't know if you've seen that show Breaking Bad, but there's a scene where Walter White finds out he has cancer, and he's just completely numb, and there's a ringing in his ear because it takes time to process big pieces of information, life-changing pieces of information, and that's pretty much how I felt, just feeling numb and surprised. But I was happy that I had a few weeks to prepare, get the things you need, whether it's diapers and rompers and baby wipes and all these things. But fast forward 20 hours from the moment she tells me, we're in the delivery room, and I'm holding her hand, and she's afraid, and I'm afraid, and we don't know what's happening, but she's giving birth. And we're about 4 people in the delivery room, me, her, and her friends. And before I know it, in a room of 4 people, 5 people come out. You know, this miracle of birth that we've all heard a million times, the cliche of the magic of life and all these things I didn't know were true, but surprise, surprise, they are. But one thing's for sure is we don't have a name for him yet, and we didn't really prepare for this lifestyle change that's happening to us. So officially, his name was still number 1 van de Wetering. He took his mother's last name. And as I'm holding number one Vandavetering, I realize there's a lot of things I don't know. There's uncertainty in the world. COVID's just starting to happen. I don't have a apartment. I don't have a stable job to take care of him. There's a lot of things I don't know. But the one thing I do know is looking at number one Vandavetering that my life will never be the same. And I'm actually extremely happy that it'll never be the same. Because now I have something to live for greater than myself, which I didn't have before. Now, even if I know that my life has changed forever and I'm so excited to tackle this new challenge of fatherhood, the reality is I still had 20 hours notice. The mom had about a month's notice. His mom had about a month's notice before she found out she was pregnant. So neither of us really prepared that much. And what that meant is we were initially put in the Dutch healthcare system or child service system, which meant that he was watched for about 3 months while his mother and I kind of gathered our thoughts and started making a plan for our life now. And I'm extremely happy about that because that woman taught us so much about raising a child and how to recognize which cry means which and how to change a diaper and just the most basic things that most parents knew coming in through books and podcasts and all these other things. But I'm getting ahead of myself because the day after he was born, and with barely any sleep, I go to class. And the lecturer is talking about the phases of innovation or something that I can't even remember. And the entire time I'm in class, I'm thinking about number one Vandavetering. I still have the sweater that I was wearing during his birth with all types of fluid on there and blood and a bunch of other things. Just numb to everything going on around me because I know that even if I'm in class, the most important thing in my life right now, number one Vandavetering, is in the hospital, sleeping. And nothing can faze me at this point because there's no news, there's nothing anyone can say that will take my mind off my son, my newly born son. Even if I've known about him for just a few days, he's still immediately the most important thing in my life. And there's a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt in this moment. But one thing I know for sure is I think I can do this. In fact, I know I can do this. I know I can juggle being a student and being a father and having a job. And I thought I could have a social life, but that's asking too much. But the overwhelming feeling was this is possible, this is amazing, and this is going to change my life for the better. Now, fast forward 2 years, and I'm in a place where I have a schedule that works for my entire family. I get home from school, I pick up my son, I make him a meal, I play with him for an hour, and I put him to sleep. And the next day, same thing. Within those 2 years was a lot of trial and error. I remember in the beginning, this was just as COVID was taking effect. And we were living in a 24 square meter studio apartment with a baby and a few other student houses nearby. And I felt honestly lost in that moment. You're in a 24 or 22 square meter apartment and you hear a crying baby while your neighbors are out partying, playing loud music. It was a bizarre juxtaposition that I was in. And immediately you learn rather how to adapt, how to kind of roll with the punches, how to join an online class while there's vomit dripping off your leg and you're changing a diaper and the teacher calls your name to ask you a question. You kind of just wing it. And I was walking around here in Rotterdam, a city that's absolutely beautiful, but coming from Amsterdam, there's a little bit of healthy competition between the two cities. And the one thing I noticed was this city, because it was bombed during World War II, they kind of had to start from scratch. The city was modern and built with a design in mind, and Amsterdam kind of just organically happened. And immediately I noticed that even if there isn't that much history in these buildings, it's beautiful because they got to start fresh, start new. And I hate to say it, but it's in some parts more beautiful than Amsterdam. And that reminded me of what it's like to be in my position now, where life kind of starts from scratch again, the moment I became a father. And I get to reinvent myself every day with my son in mind. And honestly, I'm sure a lot of people out here are going to have kids in the future, and you'll realize quickly how fast it changes your life. But there's not a lot of things I'm more proud of than the struggles I went through balancing becoming a new father and online classes, which was a struggle for everyone, just the technological difficulties that our teachers were dealing with in terms of Teams, jumping from Teams to Skype to Zoom. Everyone was struggling, but it hit me at the most perfect time because I got to spend every day with my son and even joined a few online classes with him on my lap. I remember writing an entire homework or assignment from beginning to end with him on my lap as one hand is feeding him with the bottle, the other one is typing as I'm shaking my leg and using my face to rub his head to put him to sleep. Or whether it's a time I was interviewed on video that was recording as he was on my lap and I'm bouncing him and he just projectile vomits all over my leg mid-interview and I have to act like nothing's happening while the interviewer is laughing across the camera. And these are just moments that honestly, even now that it's just been a year, I look back on as happy, funny, and character building moments that I hope never to forget because they've changed and made me who I am now, even if it's only been 2 years or a year and a half. And this is essentially the point of this podcast, to put a spotlight on people today jumping from kid to adolescent to adulthood, and the milestones along the way that we face, milestones that make us who we are. Because I'm sure there are people across this platform listening with crazy and inspirational stories that take place every day that inspire them, their friends, and their family to do things better than they've done before. And that's why we're here, not just as people, but here in this podcast to inspire me and those around me and those around this podcast to face life's problems head on, or at least listen to those who have and think, what can we take from that? How can that inspire me? How can that push me to do something I'm slightly more afraid of, but I have to do? And I understand the value of that. I understand listening to some of my friends in the Philippines who went through the same thing I did and had their own struggles and finished school as well, and listening to them explain how they balanced parenthood and family life and school and a job really inspired me to think this is possible and I'm excited for this. And the one thing that really changed my perspective on life in general as a parent is just that your time frame or what you think about changes drastically. I used to think about today, tomorrow, next week, next month, next year, or maybe a couple years down the line, but now I'm forced to think, okay, in 10 years, in 20 years, in 30 years, what will my life look like? And I was never forced to face those things before. And I'm really happy that now I get to, because I actually get to make plans with how I approach my future, which sounds so simple in theory, but I just never did that before, right? Like I said, would wait till the last possible moment to do any of my responsibilities school-wise. And now that's different because now I don't have the same amount of free time to do all of my work. And I don't have weekends off and I don't have the evenings off because in the morning, no matter how late I sleep, he'll still wake up. Charlie will still wake up at around 8, 7:30. And that's the start of my day. And that's the routine that I'm placed in. So I'm forced to be creative and work around his schedule, which is actually giving me the routine that I always needed. And with this podcast, I want to talk about the routines that other people have made or the life decisions that other people have done that put them in a position now, in a bright position now that otherwise they didn't even think about. So if there are any podcast guests that you'd love for us to interview or to hear about, or stories that you think we absolutely should share, please send us an email. The details of the contact information should be in the description of this episode. But this is the pilot. This is essentially what we want to talk about every week for about 25 to 45 minutes. This is my story, my personal story. And as this podcast continues to go on, I'll continue to update you and discuss the milestones that I'm achieving little by little, or that I'm going through little by little, because everything they say about parenthood is absolutely true. The cliches are true. Like every moment is a milestone. Every day can have a milestone, and we just don't think about them. And eventually, looking back at the past year, he just turned 2 last week, there have been a lot of things that I even forget, like because of our specific situation during the second year of my studies, we were in the care of child services. And that sounds like an oxymoron when I say it now, but child services essentially had a worker who was assigned our case. Two young parents weren't sure how they were going to tackle parenthood. And my son's mom and my son were put in a foster care program that young mothers who need direction and guidance in the early stages of parenthood all have to live under. And one time a week, she was allowed to leave this foster house and sleep over anywhere she wanted. And one of these days, she slept over where I was staying and missed the call of the manager of this house. Now, the manager of this house assumed that meant that she was taking herself and her son out of the care of of the foster house, and she immediately called child service. And this created a domino effect that led us to eventually go to court to fight for the right to take care of our son while test season was happening. So as I was having no sleep, on the phone with a lawyer, on the phone with her lawyer, and having to go to court in the same week that my deadlines were due. And thankfully, this is group work, and I mentioned this to my team, and they stepped in and did 40% of the work required of me to allow me to just clear my head and go to court and speak my piece. And eventually, good news, we were given the right to care for our son, and everything's been uphill from then or downhill from then. I don't know what the expression is, but everything's been great comparatively since then. And these are just some of the milestones that I faced throughout the past 2 years. And I'm particularly interested in people who are obviously in my position, because we'll have a lot to talk about, but anyone who's also started a business or anyone who's used their life situation to propel a direction for their studies. And what I mean by this is throughout the second year of my studies, every time there was a project where I had to discuss a business, create an innovation, anything related to school, I would take the approach of the perspective of a parent. And that was kind of the anchor for my entire second year, whether it's talking about baby clothes or baby strollers or baby carriers or the lifestyle of a parent and all these other things. I angled the work in my study to reflect that of my own life. And a strange thing that actually happened is my grade point average from second year increased in comparison to my grade point average from first year. So this actually gave me a goal, a motivation, an X factor to do better. And this kind of led me towards investing, actually. I was in the Philippines, we don't have healthcare like they do here in the Netherlands. And my grandmother, who was unfortunately diagnosed with cancer a few months ago, needed to sell some of her property in order to pay for her medication. And she would prefer to sell it to people in her family so it stays in the family. And my mother called me up one of these days, this was last summer, with the opportunity of buying this property. Now, I don't have the money to buy this property, but I do have some money saved up. And what I did was I struck a deal for me to pay a certain amount, almost like a mortgage, so to speak, to purchase this small piece of property from my grandmother and just pay small installments every single year. And now this isn't an LLC. It's not in my name for legal reasons, of course, but it's an entity that I have some control over. It's a direction that I have in my life, and that sent me on a into a spiral of real estate investing and other forms of investing that I've just only begun to scratch the surface of. But I wouldn't have thought of buying property and investing for the next 10, 15, 20 years if it weren't for the perspective of my son is one day going to turn 18, 20, 21, and so forth. And that kind of propelled me to say yes to this opportunity. Because of course I would rather just spend the money I had saved up on going out and buying drinks and going to restaurants and buying shoes. And now I had something else. I had a different why. The why wasn't just for me to enjoy myself, but the why was to make sure that my son has some level of security. And of course, he's Dutch, and over here in the Netherlands, you have fantastic social securities, and And no one's going hungry here, but still, that perspective of I have to think about someone else led me and motivated me to start investing in things that otherwise I wouldn't have. And I learned that parenthood is, I'm still learning rather. He's 2 years old. And I'm learning every day that there are a lot of responsibilities associated with a lot of them make you, and responsibilities in general seem to make you a better person. It's one thing to always be told that and to hear that growing up, that you should take responsibility of yourself because you're going to be an adult. And we all know that instinctively, but to actually feel some level of pressure of responsibility is so much better than I thought it would be. It's so much more motivating than I thought it would be. It's so much more inspiring than I thought it would be. And I know I'm perhaps rare in the amount of students who became a father, but I know I'm not rare in the amount of students who have external responsibilities that are propelling them forward. And these students are the students I want to talk about or talk to, and hopefully inspire you. Maybe you don't have something going on as big as starting a business or dealing with a death of a loved one, but maybe you've stopped an addiction. Maybe you've stopped smoking cigarettes. Maybe you've stopped excessive social media use. Maybe you've stopped pornography, which is another topic that a lot of people in our generation now have always been exposed to, but we don't talk about the effects it has on our brain, any form of addiction. And maybe you've gotten over one of these addictions and can tell your story. Maybe you know someone who's gone over these addictions. You can tell their story. Maybe through your life, you can change someone else's life forever. And that's a cliche sentence, I understand that, but what I've learned is that many cliches are cliches for a reason. And I want to give the opportunity for other people to spotlight cliches that we could all assume are just true, but give body to it. Give us an anchor to these cliches. Let us get inspired by these people. So again, if you know anyone with an inspirational story of any kind, of any milestone, of any millennial milestone, then please leave us a message and we'd love to get back to you. And I know that technically millennials are anyone born over, or I know that technically millennials are people who were born before 1997, and I was born at 1997, so technically I'm Gen Z. But Gen Z milestones just doesn't have that same flair. And so I understand that many of the people I'll get for this podcast are actually Gen Z, and I know that I'm Gen Z, but you get the idea. This is a podcast based off the milestones of people and the inspiration we can take. This was just the pilot episode, and we look forward to continuing this year over many weeks. But if you like this pilot and you have any tips, comments, or ideas that you think we should try, please send us a message, and we'd love to adapt the way we create this podcast as it goes on. And again, I've been your host, Jeremy Doramal. I'd like to say thank you to anyone who's gone through this entire episode, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.